This is mini lecture 5A. We will begin Unit 5, Essential Healthcare Skills, and we'll begin with Chapter 10, which covers a very important essential healthcare skill, which is infection control. Infection control, of course, is the prevention of the spread of infectious diseases, which are caused by pathogens. When we see the widespread occurrence of an infectious disease, we call that an epidemic. When it's a global occurrence, we call it a pandemic. COVID-19, of course, is a pandemic. There are different types of infections, generalized versus localized. Know the difference. And one of the key differences involves the signs and symptoms. Since a generalized infection affects the whole body, we see signs and symptoms like headache, fever, vomiting, whereas a localized infection affects one area of the body, so we might see heat and pain and swelling. Which of the following may be signs or symptoms of a localized infection? If you chose C, you are correct. When an infection occurs while a patient is receiving health care, we call that a healthcare-associated infection, HAI, and this is a big problem. And it's a big problem because it's dangerous for employees and patients alike, but also because we're seeing an increase in these HAIs over the past 25 years. Along with healthcare-associated infections, other health and safety issues that occur in the healthcare setting include industrial illness, sharps injuries, and needle stick injuries. There are several regulatory agencies that track, follow, recommend around things like infectious diseases and also workplace injuries. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is the CDC, and they study the cause and distribution of diseases. OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, looks at workplace health and safety standards. So let's get back to these microorganisms. These are very small, usually one-celled living plants and animals. Keep in mind that they are not all harmful. There are friendly microorganisms that live on and in us and actually contribute to our good health. But there are also pathogens, which of course are unfriendly. We do have some defenses against infection by pathogens. They involve the immune response, antibodies or proteins that fight those pathogens. But remember, in the healthcare setting, one of the issues is that we have individuals, patients in a weakened condition with an immune system that might be compromised or run down. So they are more likely to become infected. And that's actually called an opportunistic infection. Your textbook does look at the different types of microorganisms. You won't be responsible for the detail around that, but you'll study that more in your health care programs and in microbiology as well. Now, something to note here is that microorganisms often like moisture, darkness, and food supply, or they need moisture, darkness, and food supply, and the human body does provide that. So the food supply is found in the host. These are living organisms that supply food. Microorganisms that are aerobic require oxygen to live? Correct. There are other defense mechanisms that the human body has. Cilia in the respiratory tract, of course, coughing and sneezing. Tears. Hydrochloric acid in the stomach destroys bacteria. Mucous membranes. A rise in a body temperature can also deactivate viral proteins and of course increasing white blood cells, the leukocytes. Now when we study or consider preventing the spread of infection, we talk about the chain of infection, and you see the links of the chain illustrated. We know that breaking any link prevents the infection from spreading. Your textbook has this image. Read through it very carefully, or you can stop the video here and read through it, because not only does this show you the links of the chain, it shows you how you would possibly break those links and then stop the spread of infection. Chain of infection must be kept intact? Of course not. You want to break the chain of infection. So the most important thing you can do to decrease the source of microorganisms is to wash your hands. Also practice aseptic techniques and avoid contact when you are contagious. Hand washing should be done often and correctly. And you must use the proper technique. As I mentioned, often and correctly, anytime you might transfer microbes. Which of the following activities is the most critical in preventing the spread of infection? They're all important, but hand washing is the most critical. So what are some of these aseptic techniques? These are methods for making the environment as pathogen-free as possible. Bacteriostatic inhibits the growth of microorganisms. Bactericidal kills microorganisms. Which of these methods is bacteriostatic? Preventing the growth. And that is an antiseptic. Disinfectants and sterilization kill microorganisms. Medical asepsis decreases the number of pathogens, so things like hand washing, clean rooms, using gloves. Surgical asepsis completely eliminates pathogens. So this is a sterile technique. This is a much higher level of removing pathogens from the environment. We have sterile caps and gowns and gloves and instruments and even a sterile field. Sterile field is an area that's free of microorganisms. So there's a specific procedure to maintain that sterile field, and some of the points are written here. You would have to learn this if you are going to be anywhere near an area that is sterile, such as an operating room. Antiseptics are chemical agents that inhibit the growth of pathogens. They can be used on skin. An example is isopropyl alcohol. Disinfectants destroy most bacteria and viruses. An example of a disinfectant is 10% bleach solution, and also boiling water. Sterilization completely destroys microorganisms. When we talk about preventing the spread of infections, we quite often talk about standard precautions. Standard precautions should be used anytime there is a potential for infectious fluids. So if a healthcare worker is coming into contact with body fluids including blood, non-intact skin, or mucous membrane, and this should be used with every patient, even if you don't know if they have an infection. If you're coming in contact with body fluids, non-intact skin, or mucous membranes, you need to practice or follow standard precautions, and it involves washing your hands, wearing gloves, wearing a mask, wearing a gown. You must also Clean and disinfect surfaces, handle and clean linens properly, dispose of infectious waste properly, and if we know a patient is contagious, they should be placed in private rooms if possible. When we're talking about blood-borne pathogens and standard precautions around them, we need to understand that needle stick injuries could possibly spread these. So we don't recap needles, we use puncture-proof containers for disposing of them. And when you are resuscitating a patient, you need to use protection. Wear personal protective equipment or PPE and follow transmission precautions. There's a lot involved here. This is serious stuff. You need to approach every patient as if they are infectious, and if you are coming into contact with any open skin, body fluids, you need to make sure to wear personal protective equipment. Gloves, masks, eyewear, gowns, caps. And you also have to put them on and take them off properly in order for those to be effective. So before we leave this unit, it's also important to understand that the stronger we can make our immune system, the better we're able to ward off infection. And this goes for our patients as well. So we want to practice good hygiene. We want to make sure that we have proper nutrition and fluid intake and decrease any stressors that weaken immune response. Put very simply, we need to take care of ourselves. We need to make sure that our patients take care of themselves so we stay strong and keep a strong immune system.